The winter of 1942 brought Britain closer to defeat than German bombers ever managed. Not through fire raining from the skies, but through silence beneath the waves. Every week, another convoy disappeared into the Atlantic darkness, taking with it the food, fuel, and ammunition that kept the island nation breathing. The statistics told a story of systematic strangulation. Over 175 cargo ships sinking monthly at the campaign's peak, more than 3,500 merchant vessels lost since the war began, and Britain's food reserves measured not in months but in weeks. The Battle of the Atlantic was not merely another theater of World War II. It was the war's central artery, and German U-boats were severing it with surgical precision. Winston Churchill would later write that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the entire conflict. A remarkable admission from a man who faced the Blitz, the fall of France, and the prospect of invasion. His fear was grounded in cold mathematics. Britain imported approximately 2/3 of its food and virtually all of its oil. Cut those supply lines, and the nation would starve into submission without a single German soldier setting foot on English soil. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's U-boat fleet, understood this vulnerability with crystalline clarity. His strategy was elegantly brutal. Deploy enough submarines to sink merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. The number suggested he was succeeding. By late 1942, German submarines were destroying cargo vessels at nearly 3 times the rate of new construction. Each convoy that departed North American ports faced a gauntlet of wolf packs, coordinated groups of U-boats that hunted in formation, sharing intelligence and overwhelming escort defenses through sheer numbers. The Allied response seemed technologically sophisticated. Royal Navy destroyers and corvettes carried as-Dick sonar systems, later known as sonar in American terminology, capable of detecting submerged submarines at distances up to 2,500 yards. The principle was straightforward. Emit sound pulses underwater and listen for echoes bouncing off enemy hulls. When operators detected a submarine, escort vessels would race toward the contact, building speed for an attack run. Depth charges, barrel-shaped explosives preset to detonate at specific depths, would be rolled off the stern in patterns designed to bracket the submarine's estimated position. In theory, this system should have devastated the U-boat fleet. In practice, it failed with maddening consistency. Royal Navy records documented the grim reality. An average of approximately 60 depth charge attacks were required to achieve a single confirmed U-boat kill. 60 attacks. 60 opportunities for convoys to be left vulnerable while escorts chased contacts. 60 chances for the hunter to become the hunted as U-boats slipped away into the depths. The problem revealed itself with cruel consistency during every attack run. ASDIC operators would track their target with growing confidence as the range decreased. 1,500 yards. 1,000 yards, 500 yards. The sonar pings returned clear and strong, painting an acoustic picture of the submarine's position and depth. Then, at approximately 200 yards, the echo would vanish. The submarine would disappear from sonar as completely as if it had ceased to exist, leaving operators staring at instruments that moments before had been providing precise targeting data. This phenomenon wasn't occasional or random. It happened during every single attack. The moment when accurate targeting became most critical was precisely the moment when all targeting information disappeared. escort commanders found themselves in an impossible position. Commit to an attack based on the submarine's last known position, knowing that position was now approximately 90 seconds old, or break off and attempt to reacquire contact, giving the U-boat time to escape entirely. Most chose to attack. Destroyers would thunder over the estimated submarine position, crews manually rolling depth charges off the stern at predetermined intervals. The weapons would sink through the water column, their hydrostatic fuses triggering detonations at preset depths, typically in patterns covering 50, 100, and 150 feet. Massive explosions would erupt beneath the surface, sending columns of water skyward and creating shock waves that could crush a submarine's pressure hull if the charges detonated close enough. Break. Time equals sign 1,500 ms. The problem was that close enough rarely happened. During the 90-second blind spot, U-boat commanders executed evasive maneuvers that exploited every second of their invisibility. Captured German naval documents and post-war interviews with submarine commanders revealed that U-boat crews were specifically trained to use this Allied weakness. The moment sonar contact was lost, captains would order emergency depth changes, diving deeper or rising toward the surface, while simultaneously executing hard turns to port or starboard. Some particularly bold commanders would even surface immediately after the attacking destroyer passed overhead, emerging behind their pursuer in the last place Allied crews expected to find them. The psychological advantage belonged entirely to the Germans. U-boat crews operated with the confidence of men who knew their opponents were firing blind. They understood that even when depth charges detonated nearby, the odds heavily favored survival. The ocean was vast and three-dimensional, and hitting a maneuvering submarine without current targeting data was like shooting at a bird while blindfolded, relying only on where someone told you it was 90 seconds ago. Meanwhile, the explosions themselves created additional problems for Allied forces. Each depth charge detonation generated massive turbulence and acoustic interference that rendered ASDIC useless for several minutes. The water churned with bubbles and disturbed layers of varying temperature and salinity, scattering sonar pulses in chaotic patterns. By the time conditions settled enough for operators to resume searching, the submarine had typically traveled hundreds of yards from its last known position, and the search had to begin anew. This cycle of detection, loss of contact, blind attack, and acoustic chaos repeated itself thousands of times across the Atlantic. Escort crews grew increasingly frustrated, watching their depth charge racks empty while U-boats escaped to sink more merchantmen. The weapons felt powerful, the explosions were spectacular, the ships shuddered with each detonation, and crews could see the massive water columns erupting astern. But feeling powerful and being effective were entirely different things, and the convoy losses continued to mount. Into this crisis stepped an unlikely figure, Charles F. Goodeve, a Canadian-born chemist and physicist working for the Royal Navy's Department of Miscellaneous Weapons Development. Goodeve's background was academic rather than military. He had studied chemistry at the University of British Columbia and earned his doctorate at University College London, focusing on electrochemistry and physical chemistry. His career path had taken him through university research positions, not naval warfare colleges or destroyer command bridges. This outsider perspective proved crucial. Goodeve approached the U-boat problem without the institutional assumptions that constrained naval officers who had spent decades learning and teaching established doctrine. He examined the anti-submarine warfare process with the analytical mindset of a scientist troubleshooting a failed experiment, asking fundamental questions that career naval officers had stopped asking years ago. Why did depth charges have to be dropped from the stern? The answer was historical precedent and mechanical simplicity. Gravity did the work, and the attacking ship moved away from its own weapon's blast radius. But what if that historical precedent was the core of the problem? What if the solution wasn't more powerful explosives or better sonar, but attacking in a completely different direction? Goodeve's analysis revealed the fundamental flaw. The entire attack doctrine required breaking sonar contact before weapons deployment. The submarine had to pass beneath the attacking ship for stern drop charges to be effective, which meant the submarine had to enter the sonar blind spot before the attack could begin. The system was designed to fail. It wasn't a matter of better training or improved equipment. The methodology itself guaranteed that every attack would be executed without current targeting data. The solution, Goodeve proposed, was to attack forward. Launch weapons ahead of the ship while sonar contact remained solid, maintaining continuous tracking throughout the entire attack sequence. The submarine would never enter the blind spot because the weapons would reach it before the attacking vessel did. It seemed obvious once stated, but obvious solutions often face the fiercest resistance from established institutions. Goodeve's proposal encountered immediate skepticism from senior naval officers. Forward-throwing weapons had been attempted before, they argued, and had failed. The Royal Navy had experimented with various ahead-throwing systems in the 1930s, and none had proven effective enough to warrant widespread adoption. Why should this attempt succeed where previous efforts had failed? The resistance went deeper than technical objections. Military institutions during wartime face a fundamental tension between innovation and reliability. Established doctrine exists because it has worked in the past, and deviating from proven methods carries risk. Career officers who had spent decades mastering depth charge tactics were being asked to abandon their expertise in favor of an unproven system designed by a civilian chemist. The institutional antibodies against such radical change were powerful. One admiral's response became notorious in naval circles. When presented with Goodeve's analysis and the proposed forward-throwing weapon system, he declared that even divine intervention couldn't convince him to abandon depth charges for this experimental contraption. The statement revealed the depth of institutional resistance, not merely skepticism about the new system's effectiveness, but a fundamental unwillingness to question established doctrine, regardless of evidence. Goodeve recognized that conventional channels would never overcome this resistance. Technical reports and statistical analyses wouldn't change minds that had already decided. He needed to bypass the bureaucratic hierarchy entirely and demonstrate the weapon's capabilities to someone with the authority to overrule all objections. He needed Winston Churchill. Arranging a demonstration for the Prime Minister required considerable bureaucratic maneuvering, but Goodeve eventually secured a slot at a weapons testing facility. Churchill arrived with his characteristic impatience, more interested in returning to London for lunch than watching another experimental weapon that probably wouldn't work. His initial disinterest was palpable as technicians prepared the demonstration. The weapon system Goodeve had developed was called Hedgehog, named for the spiky appearance of its launcher. The device consisted of a forward-facing mortar array that could launch 24 projectiles in a single salvo. Each projectile was a small bomb weighing approximately 65 pounds, far lighter than the 300-pound depth charges then in use. The projectiles were fired in a carefully calculated pattern that created an elliptical spread ahead of the attacking ship, covering an area approximately 120 feet in diameter. The crucial innovation wasn't the launcher or the projectile design. It was the fusing mechanism. Unlike depth charges that detonated at preset depths regardless of whether they hit anything, Hedgehog projectiles used contact fuses. Time =900 ms. They would only explode if they physically struck a submarine's hull. If they missed, they would sink harmlessly to the ocean floor without detonating. This design choice had profound implications. First, it eliminated the acoustic chaos that depth charges created. If Hedgehog projectiles missed their target, the water remained clear, and sonar could immediately resume tracking without waiting for turbulence to dissipate. Second, it provided unambiguous feedback. Silence meant a miss. Any explosion meant a confirmed hit. There would be no more uncertainty about whether an attack had succeeded. No more optimistic damage assessments based on oil slicks that might have come from deliberate German deception tactics. Churchill watched the demonstration with growing interest. The Hedgehog launcher fired its salvo of projectiles in a rapid sequence, the bombs arcing forward to splash into the water ahead of the test vessel. Sonar maintained continuous contact with the target throughout the entire attack sequence. No blind spot, no loss of tracking, no 90-second gap where the submarine could maneuver freely. When the projectiles struck the practice target, the explosions were smaller than depth-charge detonations, but far more meaningful because they represented confirmed hits rather than hopeful patterns. The Prime Minister's transformation was immediate. Lunch plans were forgotten. Churchill began asking detailed questions about production timelines, manufacturing capacity, and deployment schedules. By the end of the demonstration, he had issued direct orders for mass production and immediate deployment to escort vessels, overriding all previous objections from Naval Command with prime ministerial authority. The first Hedgehog systems entered service in early 1943, and their impact on the Battle of the Atlantic was dramatic. Statistical analysis of combat results showed the kill ratio improving from approximately 60 attacks per confirmed U-boat destruction to roughly 5 attacks per kill. The improvement represented nearly a tenfold increase in effectiveness, transforming anti-submarine warfare from an exercise in frustration to a genuinely lethal threat that U-boat commanders had to respect. The psychological shift was equally important. German submarine crews had operated with near impunity, confident that the Allied blind spot would allow them to escape most attacks. Hedgehog eliminated that confidence. U-boat commanders could no longer rely on the 90-second window to execute evasive maneuvers because the weapons arrived while sonar contact remained solid. The hunted had become the hunters, and the Atlantic's balance of power began shifting. One vessel's combat record illustrated Hedgehog's effectiveness with stunning clarity. USS England, a destroyer escort designated DE 635, achieved what remains the most remarkable anti-submarine warfare record in naval history. Between May 19th and May 31st, 1944, England sank 6 Japanese submarines in just 12 days using Hedgehog weapons. 6 confirmed kills in less than 2 weeks represented more submarine destructions than most escort vessels achieved during their entire service lives. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet, responded to England's achievement with a declaration that there would always be an England in the United States Navy. The statement honored both the vessel's extraordinary performance and the historical alliance between Britain and America, but it also acknowledged the revolutionary impact of the weapon system that made such success possible. Yet even as Hedgehog proved its effectiveness in combat, an unexpected problem emerged. Many crews initially distrusted the new weapon system, and their reasoning revealed fundamental aspects of human psychology regarding trust, perception, and the gap between feeling effective and being effective. Depth charges had provided powerful sensory feedback. The explosions were massive and spectacular, sending water columns hundreds of feet into the air. The ship shuddered with each detonation. Crews could see and feel the weapon's power, creating a visceral sense that they were doing damage to the enemy, even when statistical evidence suggested otherwise. The theatrical nature of depth charge attacks made them psychologically satisfying regardless of their actual effectiveness. Hedgehog offered no such satisfaction when projectiles missed their targets. The bombs would splash into the water and sink silently if they failed to strike a submarine. No explosions, no water columns, no dramatic evidence of power being unleashed. To crews accustomed to the spectacle of depth charge warfare, this silence felt like failure, even though it simply meant the weapons were functioning exactly as designed. Training officers documented the challenge of convincing skeptical crews that silence was acceptable and even desirable. They had to fundamentally reverse sailors' understanding of combat feedback, teaching them that quiet meant a miss, while any explosion meant a confirmed kill. The concept was counterintuitive because it required trusting the weapon's design, rather than relying on sensory evidence that felt powerful and therefore effective. This phenomenon extended beyond individual crew psychology to institutional acceptance. Some naval officers continued advocating for depth charges even after statistical evidence clearly demonstrated Hedgehog's superior performance. They preferred weapons that felt powerful over weapons that were measurably more effective, revealing how deeply human judgment can be swayed by dramatic presentation rather than objective results. The Hedgehog story illuminates timeless patterns in innovation and institutional resistance that extend far beyond naval warfare. Throughout history, breakthrough solutions have been rejected by experts specifically because they challenged established systems and required abandoning familiar methods. The pattern repeats across fields: medical innovations, dismissed by practicing physicians; business strategies, rejected by industry veterans; scientific theories, opposed by established researchers. What made Goodeve's success possible was not superior technical knowledge. Many naval officers understood the sonar blind spot as well as he did. His advantage was the outsider's ability to question fundamental assumptions that insiders had stopped examining. He could ask why depth charges had to be dropped from the stern because he hadn't spent decades learning that they did. His lack of traditional military authority became a strength rather than a weakness because it freed him from institutional constraints. The broader implications reach into contemporary organizational challenges. How many critical innovations today fail not because they're technically inadequate, but because institutional systems refuse to question their own assumptions? How many problems persist because the people with the authority to solve them are the same people whose careers are built on current methods? How many lives are lost, opportunities missed, or crises prolonged because challenging established doctrine requires more courage than most individuals possess? Goodeve's story suggests that breakthrough innovation often requires three elements: analytical clarity to identify the actual problem, rather than symptoms, creative courage to propose solutions that violate established doctrine, and bureaucratic skill to navigate institutional resistance. All three were necessary. Understanding the problem without proposing a solution accomplishes nothing. Proposing a solution without the ability to overcome institutional resistance leaves the innovation stillborn. The final statistics tell the story of Hedgehog's impact. The weapon system and its successors accounted for over 50 confirmed U-boat kills during World War II. More significantly, Hedgehog remained in naval service well into the Cold War era, with some vessels carrying the system into the 1970s. 3 decades of operational use represented a lasting testament to the power of questioning the impossible and the courage required to challenge failing orthodoxies. The Battle of the Atlantic's outcome was determined by many factors: increased escort production, improved convoy tactics, better intelligence from code-breaking operations, and the eventual closing of the Mid-Atlantic air gap. But Hedgehog's contribution was transformative precisely because it addressed the fundamental flaw in anti-submarine warfare doctrine. It turned the hunter's disadvantage into an advantage, eliminating the blind spot that had allowed U-boats to operate with near impunity. Charles Goodeve never commanded a warship or led troops into battle. His contribution to victory came through analytical thinking and bureaucratic courage rather than traditional military valor. Yet his impact on the war's outcome was profound and measurable. He altered the course of the Atlantic campaign and potentially the entire war by refusing to accept that the impossible was actually impossible. The central question his story poses remains urgently relevant. What responsibility do individuals have to challenge failing orthodoxies, even when facing overwhelming institutional resistance? The comfortable answer is that challenging established systems is someone else's job: the experts, the leaders, the people with authority and credentials. The uncomfortable truth is that experts often have the most to lose from admitting their methods are failing. Leaders frequently built their careers on current doctrine, and authority itself can become an obstacle to necessary change. Goodeve's legacy is not merely a weapon system that helped win a crucial campaign. It is the demonstration that one individual with clarity of thought and courage of conviction can alter the course of history when institutional systems refuse to question their own assumptions. The blind spot that nearly lost the war was not primarily technical. It was psychological and institutional. A failure to question established doctrine even when that doctrine was demonstrably failing.